Hello everybody, my name's Beau Foxworth. I am a professional actor in the Los Angeles area, and I have been working professionally since I was 18 years old. In the theater predominantly, but in film and television as well. Welcome to pandemic learning. It's a very strange world we're living in now. I hope you're all safe at home and staying healthy and still trying to learn. It's a little more difficult for actors because so much of our work depends on being with other people and interacting directly with someone. So this is all very strange for me, but we're going to give it a go. Mr. Walcott asked me to talk to you about approaching a role or a scene or a speech, and I thought a role would be a little too much in the time we're allotted, but I am going to go over how I might approach a speech in a play that I'm preparing for. I had originally thought to do To Be or Not to Be because, well, we all know that speech, and then I thought, well, maybe that's not such a great idea, but I changed my mind because I was contacted a couple days ago by Southwest Shakespeare Company in Arizona about doing a Zoom reading of Richard III, which I did there in 2010. So it's been 10 years, but they got a lot of the original cast together and they're doing this Zoom reading of it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll talk about his first speech, "Now is the winter of our discontent." One of the first things I do when I sit down, I'm about to start working on a role, is read the play. I cannot emphasize enough how important that is. I know that may seem pretty basic and simple, but a lot of people don't do it or read it once. But in Shakespeare, it is important to read the play and reread the play and reread the play and read it as many times as you can, because with every reading you are going to learn more. It is a wealth of information about your character, about what's going on, about the people around you, and it's filled with images and metaphors that will aid you in creating a role. I am a very physical actor, so I like to approach things with that in mind, with a physical image in mind. One of my favorite books when I was in college, when I was in graduate school actually, was this book, Year of the King by Anthony Shear. It is a sketchbook and diary of Anthony Shear's preparation for the role of Richard III at the RSC. And he latched on to a certain image that spoke to me as a physical actor. And I swore that if I ever got to play this role, that I was going to use that image to help create the role. Now, in reading the play, I mean, there are hundreds and hundreds of images. I mean, everyone says something about Richard, and a lot of it is animal imagery. Here's just a small sampling of what things are said about him. Evil spirit, dog, elvish marked abortive rooting hog, son of hell, bottled spider, poisonous bunchback toad, unmannered dog, devil, dreadful minister of hell, lump of foul deformity, hedgehog. So you see, there's a lot of animal imagery there, but the thing that Anthony Shear used was the image of the bottled spider. And that image really spoke to me, I think is a really powerful image. So I stole that. And that's what we do as actors. We are thieves. We steal wherever we can. And I encourage you to steal wherever you can, because no matter who you're stealing from, you're never going to recreate what that person did or be what that person is. You will always make it your own. And that image was just so powerful that I knew I had to use that. And I began to work on it in my backyard with two arm crutches. Not underarm crutches, but forearm crutches that came up to my arm. And I learned so much in that process as I began to work on the role. The physicality of him and what I could do with those things was amazing. I could fly across a room like a spider, scamper so fast, and be right in your face before you knew it. I mean, it was great. I loved doing it so much. So I did steal that, and I am proud to say that I felt like it really turned out well. And of course, it wasn't Anthony Shear's performance or anything like it. In fact, someone came to see my production. This old British man came to see it and talked to me after the show and said that he had seen Anthony Shear's production and thought that I took it a step further, and felt that my physicality of it was better. Not to toot my own horn, but that's what he said. So I think I was fairly successful in that. Now I want to show you what the speech might look like in the script after I've worked on it for a little while. So this is what it looks like. I know it's almost indecipherable and a jumbled mess, but just the action of actually writing it is going to help you remember things. And if I need to remember something or have a reference to something, I can quickly find it. I usually use green pens. I try to find as many colored pens as I can, or I usually use about 3, honestly. Black, green, and red. And I use the green ones to give me quick definitions of things. Red, usually for color words, things that I want to manipulate or words I want to use to help tell the story in certain ways and that connect to other words that I've also said in the play, so opposition and things like that. Often I will split the speech up with some black lines that just show where there's big beat changes, changes in attitude and meaning and feeling and things like that. Musicality. The musicality of a speech is something that's very important to me. Variation within the speech, the changes within a speech, vocal changes. It's very difficult for an audience member to sit and listen to someone scream all the way through a speech. You just tune out. You can't listen to that. Usually in that case, that person doesn't know what they're saying, which leads me to the most important, hands down, the most important thing in approaching a speech, which overcomes everything else in my mind, including scansion, which is very important to understand and know. I am not going to deal with that at this time, or at least very limited bit of it, because it will help you to understand what you're saying and to make it clearer, usually. But if I need to say something in a way that's opposed to the scansion to make it clearer for a modern audience, then I will do that. The only rules in Shakespeare are the number one rule in Shakespeare is there are no rules. Whatever you can do to make it clear and make sense to a modern audience is the most important thing you can do. So, we're going to look at the whiteboard. Don't you feel like you're in school now? I figured I should make this as interesting for myself as possible, since we're stuck in the middle of this pandemic and I'm at home and I can't go anywhere. So I thought I would try a variety of things to make it a little more interesting for you, instead of just seeing me talk at a table for however long this ends up being. This way you can have a script of your own and follow along, and I can make indications so you can actually see what I'm talking about. So let's get started. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. So there are the first two lines. Now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. So right off the bat, what do I know? Now. This is happening now. This is a very current play. So as the play begins, now tells us this is happening in the moment. Right? This is a history play. Most of these events actually happened, or a version of them. But as this begins, we know that what's about to unfold is happening now. So now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York. Okay, so another thing I noticed is there's a lot of nature imagery. We have winter, we have summer, and we have sun. Winter being cold and bitter and sad and dark, and summer being happy and bright and warm. So these two play in opposition to each other. And then we have discontent and glorious. So discontent is sorrow or grief in this instance, and glorious is almost the opposite of that, something happy and cheerful, right? So now is the winter of our discontent made, and made tells me something is changing, is made glorious. It's made glorious summer by this son, the sun being another nature image, son of York. So now is the winter of our discontent, our sadness, our grief, made glorious summer by this son of York. Now, son is spelled S-U-N in some versions, but in others it is S-O-N, which is really what he's trying to say. So the word has a double meaning in this case. Son fitting, the S-U-N fitting in with the nature imagery, and S-O-N being the son of somebody. And in this case, it is the son of York. The son of York, in this case, was Edward IV, who was my older brother. So I am also a son of York. So at this time, I'm going to take a moment just to look at something that will help us make all these connections of people. So let's look at that real quick. Shakespeare's history plays can be extremely complex as far as the characters involved. There are numerous Henrys, Richards, Edwards, and Elizabeths, and it is so important that you have who you are talking about very, very clear in your mind. So we have the beginning of Shakespeare's The War of the Roses. It begins with Richard II and Bolingbroke. And Bolingbroke becomes Henry IV, and we have Henry IV, Part 1 and 2. And then Henry V, his son, and then Henry VI, Parts 1, 2, and 3. Now this is the House of Lancaster. Now there are so many references in Henry VI series about Richard. We begin to see Richard in the Henry VI series, and he is the youngest son of Richard, Duke of York. Now we are fighting the House of Lancaster. The Yorks and the Lancasters are at war with each other, a civil war. And within that civil war, Margaret, Henry VI's wife, has my father killed, Richard, Duke of York. He has 4 sons: Edward, IV, who becomes Edward IV in right after this. Then Clarence, also known as George, his name is George. Rutland, who was also killed by Margaret, or by Margaret's henchmen, and his blood is soaked in a handkerchief and given to my father to wipe his tears before they kill him. And then myself, Richard. And in the end of Richard III, Part 3, I'm sorry, not Richard III, Part 3, Henry VI, Part 3, I kill Henry, which propels my brother, Edward IV, to the throne, and thus begins the line of York. And if you want to go further with it, at the end of Richard III, I fight Richmond. Now, Richmond is, Richmond is Henry V's wife Catherine's grandson with Owen Tudor. So he is the Earl of Richmond, and Richmond becomes Henry VII, and thus begins the line of Tudor, which moves into Henry VIII, which is another play that Shakespeare wrote, not a very popular one. So there are so many reference materials you can look at, obviously. There's Henry VI, Part 3, which I referenced a lot in preparing for Richard III, because there's a lot in here with me. There's, of course, the lexicons, which you're going to need. These have every word in Shakespeare's plays and the definition of those words. Sometimes I've referenced the Oxford English Dictionary, which I have sitting right over there, which is a huge book, which has, I need a magnifying glass to look at it because it has 9 pages on every single page. And it has the root of every word, the year it came into existence, and how the meaning of that word changes over the years. And then for the history plays, I have this book, which I love to reference. Shakespeare's English Kings, and this deals with the War of the Roses and all the individuals involved, and it's broken down in chapters by each individual and their part in this long war, civil war between these two families. So there's a lot of information, and it's important to make clear in your head. So our son of York is, now this civil war is coming to an end, our son of York is Edward IV, my elder brother. And now the war is over and things are all happy and good. And all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. So these next 2 lines, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried, are a reiteration pretty much of the first 2 lines. And all the clouds, another nature reference, that lowered, I'm going to want to look that up. It means to look grim or sullen. So the clouds looked grim and sullen upon our house, So the winter of our discontent, that was the clouds that lowered upon our house, connects with the winter of our discontent. And all these things in the deep bosom of the ocean. So that's pretty deep, are now gone. They're buried in the deep bosom of the ocean. And ocean, we have another nature reference. So a lot of nature references. So now is the winter of our discontent made glorious summer by this son of York, and all the clouds that lowered upon our house in the deep bosom of the ocean buried. Now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. Grim-visaged war hath smoothed his wrinkled front. So in these next 4 lines, Shakespeare is going to give us a list of the things that have changed that have been made glorious things that have changed from war to peace. So in the deep bosom of the ocean bare, now are our brows bound with victorious wreaths, garlands. Sometimes conquering heroes came back and they were given these garlands on their heads. So our brows are now bound with victorious wreaths. So here's more of our list. Our bruised arms, meaning our weapons of war, our shields, our swords, our armor, are now hung up for monuments. These things play in opposition to each other. So they've become monuments to war, these all of our things that we fought with. Then our second thing on the list is our stern alarms, meaning our screams and yells and horns and drums of war have now changed to merry meetings of laughing and good things and happy things. So these things play in opposition to each other. And then our third thing on our list is our dreadful marches. So obviously when you're marching to war and marching into battle, have now changed to delightful measures, dances and happy things and frolicking and other things. So these two things play in opposition to each other. So when I'm given a list like this, I kind of want to build on that list. Our bruised arms hung up for monuments, our stern alarms changed to merry meetings, our dreadful marches to delightful measures. And also, these are all our sort of color words. Color each of these so we can see them in opposition. Bruised arms, monuments. Stern alarms, merry meetings. Dreadful marches, delightful measures. And now, instead of mounting barbed steeds to fright the souls of fearful adversaries, he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber to the lascivious pleasing of a lute. Before we go on with those lines, I want to go back because I forgot to mention the summation of our list here with grim-visaged war has smoothed his wrinkled front. So we have grim-visaged war. That's a great line. Grim-visaged, meaning the face we make when we're in battle and at war, hath been smoothed over, has smoothed his wrinkled front. So all the lines we have when we're in tense and in battle have now been smoothed over. And now, instead of mounting barbed steeds, instead of getting on our horses who are armed for war, our armed horses, now instead of mounting barbed steeds, so I'd want to look that word up, and that's a horse that's clad in armor, to fright the souls, to bring fear to the souls of our fearful adversaries, the people we're fighting against. Instead of all that, he capers, meaning to dance or jump or leap about. Word you want to look up. Nimbly, and how he does it. And he's doing it easy and lightly. So he capers nimbly in a lady's chamber. Not his wife, but a lady. In a lady's room to the lascivious, which you want to look that up, but which makes me feel that it's very sexual. A lascivious pleasing of a lute. So they have a lute playing while they're playing their sexual games. So the other important thing to know is, who is he? So he capers nimbly. I'm referring to the son of York. Our brother, the king, is now, instead of going to war and doing these things, he's with a lady in her room playing sexual games. So now the tone is about to shift after this entire list of all the ways that war has turned to peace. But I, that am not shaped for sportive tricks, nor made to court an amorous looking glass, I that am rudely stamped and want love's majesty to strut before a wanton ambling nymph. So after hearing these first two lines, it's hard not to see or hear the tonal shift that is occurred from what has happened above, the sense of irony and bitterness underneath it all. The pun of the son of York now is a lot clearer, and the way I've set up how idyllic everything is in England now that the war is over and that the king has made everything great again. So there's this bitterness and irony underneath all that, and this tonal shift, and you can hear it right away in this, because now I'm changing the subject to about me. This is about me now. But that I'm not shaped for sportive tricks, so we're going to see why I'm not shaped, but he has a shriveled hand and a foot that's shorter than the other and a hump on his back. Sportive tricks, meaning the sexual games that the king is playing, so we can connect that to there. Nor made to court an amorous looking glass. So I'm not really shaped to or made to look at myself in a mirror, to be. I'm not good looking enough to admire myself in a mirror, right? So we have a reiteration of that am rudely stamped, rudely made, poorly made, and want love's majesty. I want these things. I want the good looks. I want the good looks to strut before a wanton ambling nymph, so I can like parade in front of this sexual being, a nymph, a pretty ladies, and so that they can admire me. I want all these things. I that am curtailed of this fair proportion, cheated a feature by dissembling nature, deformed, unfinished, sent before my time into this breathing world scarce half made up, and that so lamely and unfashionable that dogs bark at me as I halt by them. So we can see the resentment and the bitterness building up here, that I, that am curtailed, cut off from this fair proportion, these good looks, having good looks of this fair proportion, cheated, tricked out of feature, tricked out of these good features, of good looks, by dissembling nature. Dissembling, I want to look that up, but it's like lying, hypocritical, false appearing nature. So there's that reference to all the nature references above, that how I feel about nature this, so we really feel the irony and the bitterness of everything that I said earlier on, right? And it's all lying, dissembling nature's fault. That I'm deformed, hunchback, unfinished, my legs too short or clubbed, sent before my time into this breathing world, sent too early into this breathing world, scarce half made up, the shriveled hand. And that so lamely, that so badly, so poorly and unfashionable. It's not really fashionable to have a hunchback and a club foot and a shriveled arm. That dogs, this is a horrible image, dogs bark at me as I halt by them. So if you put that image into your head when you're saying these lines, I mean, it's pretty powerful. Why, I, in this weak piping time of peace, have no delight to pass away the time. lest to spy my shadow in the sun, descant on mine own deformity. So after the buildup of all this, of my deformity and the bitterness and resentment, I have a little tonal shift I want to happen here, I think, because now I'm going to play on the audience's sympathies, I think, that to make them feel sorry for me. Why I, in this weak, this wanting of spirit and moral power, this piping time of peace, dancing and singing what happens in peace, I have no delights. I don't get to do all these things, to dance and to sing and to love and to have sexual pleasures. I have no delight to pass away the time, to spend my time, unless to spy my own shadow, in the sun, and to sing about or to comment on my own deformity. That's how pathetic I am. And therefore, since I cannot prove a lover to entertain these fair, well-spoken days, I am determined to prove a villain and hate the idle pleasures of these days. So, and therefore, I think suggests another tonal shift here. I've tried to make you feel sorry for me, but since I don't really have a choice, since I cannot prove a lover, I can't establish myself or convince anyone that I'm a lover, because I'm not shaped that way. So we have lover, to entertain, enjoy these fair, well-spoken days, these days of peace when everything's happy and good. Since I can't prove a lover to enjoy those things, I am determined. So I am resolved. I think this word shows that Richard has ambition. He doesn't just. It's not that he just wants to be this way. He's determined to be this way. And perhaps, as an actor, you're able to make some choices here. I am determined to prove a villain in opposition to love here, and hate. What kind of hate is it? Is it a pleasurable hate? Am I enjoying this hate? Do I relish this hate? I hint, because I'm determined to prove a villain, so, and hate the idle pleasures of these days, and hate the laid back and boring pleasures of these days of peace. So lover and villain, determined, I think tells us a lot about the kind of person he is and how much he's relishes this role, I think, and is going to enjoy it. And I think we'll see as we move through the play, we'll get a lot more clues to that. Plots have I laid, inductions dangerous, by drunken prophecies, libels, and dreams, to set my brother Clarence and the king in deadly hate, the one against the other. One of the most delicious things about playing this role is Richard's relationship with the audience. I get to talk to them and bring them along for the ride in whatever way I choose to do that. And I think this is a very dark and tragic play, that the funnier I can make that happen, the better it is for the audience, the more they're going to come along for the ride and in a way maybe even root for me. So that relationship is so important. And we get to see what I said, he's determined, and we get to see his ambition there. Well, from Henry VI, Part 3, I just want to read you a couple lines that I found in a speech in Act 3, Scene 2 of Henry VI, Part 3. Just quick little lines of things he says. Richard says, so do I wish the crown, being so far off. So we see his ambition is very early on. I'll make my heaven to dream upon the crown. That's what he's going to do. That's all he's aiming for. And there's a lot of things on his way. And in this play, he's gotten one step closer to them. And then listen to this. And we also get to talk to the audience and tell them what we're going to do before we do it. And then they get to see how good an actor we are. So I can be joyful and feel the pleasure in telling the audience what I'm about to do. And then they get to see me do it with all seriousness and all sincerity. So if we can sell that, they're just going to eat it up. So I say to the audience in Act 3, Scene 2, yes, I'm talking to the audience there too, why I can smile and murder whilst I smile, and cry content to that grieves my heart, and wet my cheeks with artificial tears, and frame my face to all occasions. I'll drown more sailors than the mermaid shall. I'll slay more gazers than the basilisk. I'll play the orator as well as Nestor, deceive more slyly than Ulysses could, and, like a Sinon, take another Troy. I can add colors to the chameleon, change shapes with Proteus for advantages, and set the murderous Machiavel to school. So I am telling the audience how good I am at playing this game. So here is the beginning of this plot to make me king. Right now I'm telling the audience, plots have I laid. I have set this all up. Here it comes. It's about to happen. Induction's dangerous. The initial dangerous steps I've taken that are prompted by drunken prophecies, things that have been foretold in the future, that maybe some drunken person talks about predictions he has, libels, defamatory statements, or things that have been said, and dreams. Edward is having bad dreams right now. He's not sleeping well. He feels like someone is out to get him. And I'm going to use all of these things to set my brother Clarence and the king in deadly hate. Deadly hate. The one against the other. So I'm getting rid of the steps that are in my way to reach that crown. And if King Edward be as true and just as I am subtle, false, and treacherous. So if King Edward, my brother, be as true, as honest and upright, true and just, as I am subtle, shy, sly, artful, cunning, and false, true and false, these will play against each other, and treacherous, as opposed to just, so treasonous, this is treasonous. So if King Edward be these things, as I am subtle, false, and treacherous, if King Edward be as true and just as I am subtle, false, and treacherous, I'm admitting how evil I am and how bad I am, right here. This day should Clarence closely be mewed up about a prophecy which says that G of Edward's heirs the murderer shall be. Dive thoughts down to my soul. Here Clarence comes. Today, this day, in fact, immediately following the speech, Clarence is being led to prison. So this day, should Clarence be closely mewed up, closely confined, he's going to prison. For what reason? About a prophecy, a prediction someone made and told the king, which says that G of Edward's heirs, of the people who are heirs to the throne behind Edward. As Edward's heirs, the murderer shall be. The murderer shall be. Because Edward is having these bad dreams and feeling like someone is out to get him, Richard is stoking those fears by saying, G, the murderer will be. So, G could be, is in this case, Clarence, George. But if we look at it also, G could also stand for Gloucester, which is me, the Duke of Gloucester. And then I have to pull those thoughts deep inside because Clarence is coming. I hope this has been somewhat entertaining for you. I've had a good time doing it. I know this is just my first attack on this speech. And of course, I would be going over it many more times and refining it and boiling it down and making choices and making notes in the margins with ideas as they crop up. So I encourage you to do that as you're going along. If you have any ideas for the director or thoughts that might make it clearer for the audience, to share those ideas. I hope you're staying safe and well during this crazy time we're in right now. Thanks so much for watching.